Thank you very much. So as Bill mentioned, I work in SBA's Office of Disaster Assistance, which is the program office that administers SBA's Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. It's a program that's been around for a long time. We provide up to $2 million for small businesses and private nonprofit organizations to help with their immediate working capital needs. Even though this program has been around for a long time, this is the first time ever that we've had the authority to declare a virus or pandemic event. So going back to March 6th, when the president signed the preparedness and the Coronavirus Preparedness and Response Supplemental Appropriations Act, that did two main things. One, it gave us some additional lending authority for the economic injury disaster loans. But really importantly, it gave us the authority to declare coronavirus as a disaster, which, as I mentioned, was the first time ever. So this is, a really large historical event for us. It's a national emergency. Businesses in every state and territory are eligible to apply. Over the last week, we went through a declaration-making process with all of the state and territory governors. And Administrator Carranza did a really important thing during that time where she relaxed the requirements on those governors to provide us with just a minimal amount of information on just 5 small businesses that have suffered economic injury in order to submit the request, and we were able to declare the entire state for them, rather than having to go through and identify a business in every county that we wanted to declare. So that really sped up the declaration-making process. Fast forward to now, every state and every territory, and including the District of Columbia, are now declared, and businesses have been applying for economic injury disaster loans. As I mentioned, up to $2 million. The terms can go out as far as 30 years. The interest rate for small businesses is 3.75%. The interest rate for nonprofits is 2.75%. And the first month's payments are deferred out for a full year from the date of the promissory note. And in relation to that, on the subject of deferments, Administrator Carranza did another important thing, was she deferred all payments on existing disaster loans that were still in repayment from previous events through the end of 2020. So for any homeowners or renters or businesses or nonprofits out there who are still paying on their SBA disaster loans from a previous event, they now have an automatic deferment on those loan payments through the end of the year. And it's automatic. They don't have to contact us to request it. And so this is going to be, I think, this is something that SBA did with using its own authority in order to provide additional relief to disaster survivors who might still be recovering from previous events. Right now, if you're looking for more information about SBA's Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, you can go to www.sba.gov/disaster, and there you will find our most recent updates on the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. There's also a link there to take you to the online application. If you're looking for information about SBA's other resources besides the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, you can go to sba.gov/coronavirus, and that will take you to a description of the other types of resources and programs that SBA has to help small businesses. And with that, I'll pass it back over to the host.
Thank you. I see that we have a number of questions that have been queued. Jonathan, do you want to start with bringing up those questions?
Happy to. One of the first ones that was just asked from an affiliate on the West Coast: who is eligible to receive the $10,000 grant and who is ineligible?
Alex, do you want to take that?
Sure. So through the EIDL program, the eligible applicants are small businesses, small agricultural cooperatives, We also have small businesses engaged in aquaculture, and we have private nonprofits. So all of them, are eligible to apply. The new legislation, which hasn't been enacted yet, I believe talks about a $10,000 advance on that money. And so when they apply, it's a very simple application we have. There's a self-certification that will be done, asking them to certify, that they are in fact a small business operating in their industry, and then we can move forward. One thing I didn't mention is all the things we've done with our program in order to try and expedite the decision-making process. And so if you're familiar with how the disaster loan program has worked and our requirements in other events, things like, we typically ask for the first year's tax or the most recent year's tax returns when we accept an application. We're moving forward without that because it's time consuming for some businesses to track that down. It's somewhat cumbersome for us to review it in order to establish repayment ability. So we're able to move forward without it on a credit decision. Another thing we're doing is typically on loans over a certain amount, we require a collateral. Real estate is the preferred collateral for disaster loans. But for coronavirus, we are not requiring real estate as collateral. Instead, we're going to use a general security interest. As you can imagine, right now with the disruption of government services all across the United States, it would be extremely difficult for anyone to record a lien or even get an appointment with a notary in order to do something like that. So we, took proactive steps, removed that process, and made it very easy for us to at least, secure the loan over the certain amount like we might be required to do, but still speed through making a decision and getting the money out to businesses.
Can I ask one quick follow-up on that? We had another question, someone that had reached out wondering about a business that has had a previous bankruptcy, if they would or would not be eligible for any of these loan that you're talking about today.
So for SBA's disaster loan programs, having a previous bankruptcy does not disqualify you. You should still apply and you could still qualify.
Back to you, Jonathan.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Could you walk through some of these? Several people are asking about the specific types of information that are needed. You alluded to some, but could you talk about the structure, size, scale, and any kind of revenue requirements for small businesses to be able to apply for recovery loans?
So on the disaster loan side, since we're having to make the credit decisions as quickly as possible, we're not basing the initial credit decision on repayment ability so much. We're relying more on credit. And when we pull credit, we're extremely flexible on that. On the disaster loan side, we're not this is a direct loan program. So SBA has a, extreme amount of flexibility to set these parameters ourselves. And so we've really opened it up. So, if anybody, this is a message we always tell them is, don't disqualify yourself. If you think that you have issues on your credit or things like that, that might prevent you from being approved somewhere else, don't let that prevent you from applying for this program. A lot of times, we can overcome those things very easily. And especially now, with the situation we're in with so many businesses hurting, we really have this mission right now to make as many of these loans as possible. So, while we do look at the credit, we're not so much looking at repayment ability. We can advance through on making an approval decision right away. And then as, Bill had mentioned, there's pending legislation right now to look at doing a $10,000 advancement on any application that comes in. And that's regardless if they qualify for the loan later, which means we're moving forward with a $10,000 advance on the application. Later, if we find out that you do qualify, we can loan you more money, but you still get the $10,000. If we find out that you don't qualify, you still have the $10,000.
Excellent. And I see here there's a number of questions in the queue relating to timeline. Is there a specific timeline from date of application to date of funds received that you can share with our audience?
So I don't have a specific timeline of how long it's going to take. This usually varies based on, how complicated the business structure is. I can say though that, we've already, with, the first loan approvals we were making, the first loan approval decisions were made within just a couple of days from the first declaration dates and when we first started receiving applications. So it can be very fast. The decisions, and especially with the kinds of changes that we're making to streamline it. So, I apologize, I don't have any kind of exact numbers on what to expect on the turnaround time. You'll hear some people say, I've already gotten approved. I heard from them right away. You might hear another person say, I'm still waiting, but, hopefully those ones are just around the corner, going to be contacted by the loan officer with a positive outcome of, being approved. I also like to say, we have some other plans in the works that we're trying to do to help with the increased volume we're expecting once the new program goes into effect, because the first amount of interest really came for the economic injury disaster loan. Obviously, you still have a group of businesses out there who are hesitant to take a loan, knowing that they'll have to repay it back. But having the potential for $10,000 that they don't have to pay back, well, that's going to generate a lot more interest. So we're looking at other things that we can do, other external partners that will be able to help us process those much quicker.
And there are components of the new legislation that would also address some of that in terms of larger amounts of loan that could be turned into grant. Is that correct?
So maybe Bill might be able to comment on some of the other things in the legislation. I'm not sure.
I'm here. I'm sorry. This is actually Bill Briggs, the Deputy Associate Administrator for the Office of Capital Access. Bill Manger had to drop off. We're right now, as you might imagine, trying to iron out the details of what we expect Congress will pass and the President will sign into law at this moment. So I just want to make sure I heard that question right. Can you please repeat that?
I just was asking about some of the other components in the new legislation about loan forgiveness or loans being able to be turned into grants, some portion of them.
Well, right. So right now, what the general intent and the big picture of what Congress has proposed, as we understand it, is that what Congress is calling the Paycheck Protection Program, Loan Guarantee Program, and the general idea is that they are allocating up to $349 billion directly for small businesses for job retention purposes. Now, the idea is that ultimately SBA is not going to, people, unlike the disaster program where SBA would go to sba.gov/disaster and apply there, people will not people will be working with their local lending institution in order to access these loans. SBA has over 1,800 active lenders right now who are able to kind of work with that, and we plan to bring on more in the future. And our thought is, right, and so the idea is, and as we understand it, again, this is not final, so that is a very important thing, is that, these loans, the idea is to get this capital out to small business quickly, that there's a 100% guarantee, and then on the guarantee, as long as certain conditions are met regarding payroll retention. And the maximum loan amount can be up to $10 million. And the loan amount will be determined by the average monthly payroll up to 2.5 times of the average monthly payroll. And the payments on these can be deferred for 6 to 12 months as well. And up to 8 weeks of payroll and business opportunity expenses, business operating expenses can be forgiven by the SBA. So that's kind of what people are hearing the grant, is that if I make this loan up to 8 weeks of my payroll, and that can be forgiven, and that the rest of the loan can then be paid out over a term of up to 10 years at a fixed interest rate. So that's the kind of general parameters of the program and what they're looking at, but we're still kind of waiting for Congress to officially pass the bill and for the President to sign into law. We will then, just for process sake, be working on our guidance. We are actually doing that right now. We're not waiting for Congress to act. We have pens that are scribbling as we speak, but we are doing that. And the goal of that guidance is to provide to lenders who will then be on the front lines of lending capital to small businesses. So our next key step is to get our guidance to the lenders to start making these loans to small businesses. And these are the Paycheck Protection Program loans that you're hearing a lot about in the news.
Excellent, thank you. A reminder to anyone who's new to the call that we have the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, or if you're calling in via phone, please email us a question to sbacall@nglcc.org. To the SBA team, several members of the Chamber community are reaching out regarding two major constituencies that they have, they themselves being 501c6s and not necessarily independent nonprofits, and also independent contractors who themselves are small businesses. Can you speak to the availability or opportunity for people who fall into those categories?
Yes.
So this is, oh, go ahead, Bill.
No, you go ahead.
All right, so I was going to say on the disaster loan side, independent contractors, sole proprietors definitely are eligible for the economic injury disaster loans. I just would want to remind everyone, though, that our loans are for the purpose of working capital, which might include, various types of business expenses that they had, but payroll is also included in that. Lease payments, equipment payments, any of those just regular monthly expenses, or, even if they're not done on a monthly basis, but the expenses that the business had.
Excellent, thank you. An additional question from many of the affiliate chamber leaders is regarding regional opportunities. For people who have applied for regional business grants or individual grants through their local offices for capital before the COVID crisis began, should they cancel those, or will there be any kind of conflict in the internal monitoring system at the SBA if people have multiple loans in process, both business related and recovery related?
So on the disaster side, sorry, Bill.
No, I think you and I are thinking the same thing, but go ahead.
Yeah. So on the disaster side, we always say, we're not in competition with other programs. If a business is finding, some other source of assistance that's on better terms, that's terrific. We're all for them finding whatever assistance that they need. If they find that, that program or that recovery source didn't provide everything that they needed, they could still come to SBA, the disaster loan program, and get the additional unmet needs that they have. So one thing that we always, tell people is, apply. You're not under any obligation to accept the SBA disaster loan, but at least you'll know if you qualify for it. And if you do, you can just come back to us and say, look, I need the money now. I'd like to schedule disbursement, and we'll set that up. Rather than waiting until you're in some kind of an urgent need for the money and then starting the process and having to wait, for the loan officer and everything to do the credit decision. It'd be better to just start the process now, even not knowing, how much you're going to need or when you're going to need it.
Thank you for that. Going back a question ago to make sure we answer, because it is of major concern to many of the stakeholders on the call. Are 501c6s currently eligible for any of these grants or opportunities?
So I have to check on the disaster loan side. So I know we do loans for membership organizations. The only thing really special consideration in those is that there's some, non-discriminatory requirements that they have to adhere to. But we do, the disaster loans for private nonprofits that are also membership organizations. But I'll check specifically on that classification and have to get you a clearer answer on it.
Okay, thank you. And to all the chamber leaders on the call, we'll make sure you have that information as soon as possible. An additional question regarding specific website addresses for people who may be new to the call since it began. Would you mind sharing the specific websites people should go to for some of these relief resources, which of course we'll share with everyone on the call after?
Right. So two main ones that I can share for SBA's Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. The website is sba.gov/disaster. For all of the SBA's non-disaster loan program resources, you should go to sba.gov/coronavirus. And that brings up a really good point. The SBA has a lot of different programs. We work, we have a large network around the country of regional offices, district offices, and then we also work closely with resource partners and other external partners like different chambers like yourselves. So there's all other kinds of resources. Access to capital is one part of it. There's also going to be a large push for business counseling services. That's something that we always do in disaster events is, where we might be providing access to, funds that they need immediately. We also try and encourage small businesses to look at various resources available, to them for the business counseling services or technical assistance, because you just don't really know what the recovery period is going to be like, how long it's going to take. Maybe they need to relook at their business plans. Navigating that environment could be a whole nother set of challenges by itself.
And if you are applying for disaster recovery funding, separate and apart from coronavirus assistance specifically, do you have to apply for both, or is there a way to identify that you are exploring both options on the forms?
So let me see if I understand correctly. If you're applying for disaster assistance, not related to coronavirus?
Correct. There are a couple of questions from folks who are in regions that have been deemed where there are additional emergencies, such as in the Nashville area, for example.
For the tornadoes in Tennessee.
Exactly, and there are a few others around the country. Are there ways that needs to be notated?
Yeah. So here's what I would do, and this is my recommendation. If you have physical damage, then you have to go through SBA's physical business disaster loan. It's the same application requirements and everything that we usually ask for. The difference is it's assigned to a different declaration number. So the Tennessee tornadoes, for example, will have a completely different declaration number. So you want to make sure when you're applying for assistance for your physical losses, for money to repair or replace things, that you're applying under the Tennessee one. We always offer economic injury under physical declarations. So if you're a business and it just so happens that you have, this terrible luck that you were hit, affected by the tornadoes at the same time the entire country's being affected by, business disruption from coronavirus, you have a economic injury need. And it's kind of hard to put a finger on which one that actually is a cause of. Is it a cause of the tornadoes or is it a cause of the coronavirus? But my recommendation would be apply for the economic injury under the coronavirus declaration, because that is the program that's going to have the more favorable terms.
Excellent, thank you. Several questions coming in regarding fees and process. Could you speak to when working with one of the lending partners or directly with the administration, loan origination fees, and also are there fee caps so business owners can plan ahead for additional capital they need to set aside for any of these fees? And could you explore a little more deeply about guarantees and collaterals? Several folks are asking about what additional resources may be available for collateral or guarantees, especially if they are sole proprietors or much smaller shops.
I'll let Bill go first, and then I'll explain what we do on the disaster side.
So again, I'm framing my content remarks in the context of the bill is not final. There are details to be ironed out and all that. Our understanding right now is that there are no guarantee fees and no servicing fees right now. In the law, there's no collateral requirements and limited, I think, no personal guarantees on that too as well. The idea is a very streamlined application That's what we're potentially, keyword potentially, looking at right now. So the idea is to get capital into folks' hands as quickly as possible. People who know our 7A loan program know that there are fees and so forth. I think the idea is not so much a focus on those. It's not traditional. It's a much more stripped down, ready to go product for the small businesses.
Right. So on the business side, on the disaster side, we don't charge fees. There's no prepayment penalties. You're not under any obligation to work with some kind of a loan packager. And trust me, with this kind of an event, we've already seen it. There are, different fraudulent groups out there working, posing as having some kind of a business relationship with SBA, that they're an authorized loan packager for the disaster loan program. We do not have any of that kind of thing in place. So, and these groups, sometimes will charge, thousands of dollars per customer to put together, to help to put together loan packages, but that's not a requirement, nothing that you are required to do at all. So you shouldn't have to do that. On the collateral side, I can't remember if I mentioned this in the opening part, but we're not requiring real estate as collateral for coronavirus, whereas in other declarations, real estate would be the preferred form of collateral. Instead, what we're requiring for the coronavirus declaration is a general security interest in business assets. And that can be done very simply, but it might be on furniture and fixtures, machinery and equipment, inventory, things like that.
I would also add, thank you for that. We've had a number of questions here about some of the SBA lenders. We will share an SBA approved lender list with all of the folks on the call and with our affiliates to be able to disseminate out to their membership after this call. So know that we are thinking about that, and we'll share those approved lenders with you.
Thank you, Justin. To the SBA team, several business owners are asking about the revenue and size limits, if at all, for companies to qualify.
Sure. So on the disaster loan side, the businesses are, the loans are, economic injury disaster loans are meant for small businesses. We follow the industry size standards in the North American Industry Classification System, the NAICS code. But for this event, as I was mentioning before, we've started to find a lot of ways that we can help speed up the application process and the loan processing, so we can get to a quicker decision. One of the ways we've decided to go about this is to use a self-certification where the business is going to certify that they are considered a small business in the industry that they operate in. We're going to use that as the basis that they're, for that requirement that they are small. And we'll be able to move forward for small businesses on processing loans up to the first $500,000. And if we go beyond that, then at that point, we would be looking at some tax return information going over it. But at least this will help us speed up the decision and approve and get, up to the first $500,000 out there really quickly on the economic injury disaster loans.
And are the NAICS codes and the size caps per industry available on your website?
I don't know that we have them on the disaster side, maybe on the non-disaster ones. And I forgot to mention this, but when it comes to private nonprofits, those can be any size. So there's no kind of like employee number or anything for the disaster loans.
Thank you. Several questions from business owners regarding staffing and employment. If they've had to reduce, furlough, or lay staff off to try to make ends meet, how should that be notated, and does that have an effect on any of the loans or grants?
So on our side, yeah, we definitely, once they apply and they get assigned a loan officer, there'll be an opportunity to explain what some of those expenses are. And but the loan amounts are based on what their working capital needs are. So we're looking, at operating expenses, to look and see what they need. And generally, when we look at processing the the economic injury disaster loans, we'll look at, just to kind of set a general time frame for everyone, the first 6 months of, of working capital, how much do they need for the business, and we'll do that amount first right away, up to $500,000, and in order to try and get it out to them as quickly as possible.
Thank you. And similarly, in speaking about employment, several questions from folks with industries that have been deemed essential by their state governments, as they're needing to stay open for additional hours and provide additional services. Are there any things to notate about how to expedite requests when coming to you, or is there anything specific for these essential businesses?
Right. So we don't currently have a process for prioritizing certain businesses operations over any others. Generally, we work through the first received files and go that way. So that way we're processing the oldest files and getting them done first. But that's a good. I mean, that's an approach that we've heard in the past for different disasters. I've been working in disaster for a long time. After hurricanes and things, to help with the recovery, they talk about the need to have fueling stations and grocery stores and pharmacies and some other businesses that provide critical services in order for people to really start to be able to come back. Daycare centers is another type of business, because people can't go back to work unless their children have a place to be cared for. So, but right now we don't have that. We're working through the loans as quickly as we get them and trying to process the oldest ones first.
Thank you. Specific to some of the loan applications, several folks on the call have reached out saying that the application just need a little clarity when identifying, especially question number 15 about the amount of estimated losses for the categories of real estate, inventory, and equipment, leasehold improvements, et cetera. For folks who are in non-traditional industries or things not directly covered by that, how do they report an economic loss to you in a way that makes sense?
So I believe as part of the application, there's some supplemental forms that they ask you to do, and one of them is that self-certification I was talking about, and I think they ask in there about what the operating expenses might be. So that would be one way of putting it in. What the things you were describing about the loss for like physical things, you can ignore those in an economic injury declaration. So do not complete the sections that are asking you about what your physical losses were, and do not select anything that is with that denotes like a business physical loan or business physical loss. This is strictly for the economic injury. So yeah, you can just move past those kinds of questions if we're strictly focused on economic injury and working capital.
And do you have any specific recommendations on how to frame or notate lost sales and lost projections?
So, in any other event, I would say, spend a lot of time, carefully, make your case and all that. In this, I don't think you really have to, give us a tremendous amount of detail. What we want to know are some basics. What's the nature of the operation of the business, and how has the coronavirus impacted you? So if that's from a drop in sales because there's a stay-at-home order in your area, that's all we need to know. If there's, the issue is, workers are sick or having to stay at home, and that's, causes a drop in production, then that's the reason for the economic injury. If there's been a supply chain disruption and your expenses are going up, that's the reason for the economic injury. So you don't have to go into a tremendous amount of detail. We get it. We know that this is affecting, almost every sector out there. But, just a little bit of information of how it's affected your business is helpful.
One question I have here,
Hi, I'm sorry, folks. I apologize. This is Bill Briggs again, the Deputy Associate Administrator of the Office of Capital Access. I have to jump off. We're again, big picture, we're trying to implement and begin the process of implementing what Congress is considering. Alex can stay on and answer additional questions as it relates to the ILO program. But we are in touch with their National Trade Association, and we will continue to engage with them. And they are a valuable resource for your community as well, so please use them. They do have our ear, and I do want to say that we are all trying to fight this thing together and ensure the survival of our small businesses. So we do appreciate everything that you've done in your time today. I'll be jumping off again. Alex can answer some more questions if folks have them about our disaster program.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Bill.
All right.
Just a question here. I've seen it come up several times here. Are there any limitations based on what type of corporation you are? If you're an S Corp, a C Corp, any of LLC, is there any sort of requirement or a problem with any one of those seeking relief?
No, there's no special requirements with those, but for owners over 20%, we might need financial statements on all of them. So, the more owners there are that have a higher stake in the business, it just might require some additional documentation. You're right, though. There are some types of businesses, not necessarily the structure of them, like what you were listing there. But there are some out there that we still aren't able to provide assistance to, and I'll give some examples. We've gotten this question a lot about, businesses that deal in the cannabis industry. While it might be legal in the state where the business is located, it's still not federally legal operation. So, because of that, we're not able to make the loan. That's just like one example of one type of business that we can't. But I would say, I always recommend when we're on these calls, and especially in this situation for coronavirus, we're making a lot of changes. Some of them are still yet to roll out, where we might have already made a decision on an application that came in, and then tomorrow it might reverse and say, look, we're going to open it up to include these things, and now we're going to go back and find those businesses that we declined because of those reasons and offer now assistance to them. So just we ask for everyone to just be patient, and we appreciate your guys' understanding as this thing is really fluid. But I think these changes are for the better. Like, I know it's frustrating because we're not always able to give the clearest answer right now, but it's because we're actively trying to take this economic injury disaster loan program, which was a really good program for responding to things like hurricanes and earthquakes, and things that had like a somewhat smaller footprint, and making it fit for such a large scale national emergency like this. So I think in the end, we're going to have a good program that's going to fit a lot of businesses into it. But the information is coming out, on a near daily basis. So just, best piece of advice I would say is keep in touch with us so we can get that information to you, and then you guys can get it out to your members, because it literally is changing almost by the day.
Thank you. That's actually a perfect segue to the next question. Several people have been asking about the online versus print copy application. Several people started online and said it was working, and now things have moved to a work offline and upload form. What is the correct way for people to process, and will the process be online eventually?
So the process will be online. We're actively working to make the upgrades to the system to handle the volume of activity that we've gotten. As you can imagine, there's over 30 million small businesses in the United States, and in an active year for us, a really active year, we get maybe 800 disaster loan applications, or 800,000 disaster loan applications from a really large event. So this is put an incredible amount of strain on the system, but they're responding really well, I think, to the just like almost overnight surge of applications and site visits and things. So as far as which is better, the online application is always the best way to do it. But if you are in a position where, you can't, you're having issues with it at the time, and you have the paper application forms, you can take those, you can mail them to us, you can fax them to us, or you can email them in also. The one thing I will say about the email, though, is that there is not an automatic receipt notification that comes back out if you do it that way. But trust, we are receiving those applications. They are being put into the system, assigned to loan officers. So if you do send it in that way, if you give it a day or two and then you call, you can confirm with an operator that in fact it's in the system. They'll give you your application number and everything. But the online application is going to be restored back to the way it was originally working just a couple days ago.
When you're ready for a new website, we've got some great certified LGBT-Owned design for you, and we look forward to them working on the new SBA project.
Yeah, great.
Go ahead, please.
Sorry, yeah, one question here, because I think it's on every mind on the call. People are worried about timelines and turnaround, inventory, payroll. What advice could you give to the group that just lets them know that SBA is working on this? There's such an amount of tension and anxiety that I think people just want to hear that, it might not happen overnight, but we're in this together and SBA is working on this as diligently as possible. I think if there's some, words of comfort that could be given to the folks on the line that we're, SBA is here to help, and you are doing your level best to get these funds out the door to businesses. Mm-hmm.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great point to bring up. I've been working in disaster since 2005 and responded to some of the worst, kinds of things: Katrina, Hurricane Sandy, Harvey, Irma, Maria, devastating tornadoes that have just taken out entire cities. But this is something completely different because it's not a finite area. It's basically across the whole country. It's all these different sectors. And while us in disaster assistance at SBA are pretty used to, this kind of a response, like, having to work, extremely long hours, no days off, that kind of thing. We've got the entire agency this time helping us, which is, really helpful, extremely comforting to me, because we've got some of the best professionals in government, I think. And the solutions they're coming up with for these problems that we're looking at, it's really out of the box kind of solutions. And, looking at, not so much like, how can we improve this program and how can we make a tweak here or there, like whole, things like, how do we get this money out there tomorrow? How do we handle not just, what would have been, more activity than we've ever had in any of these other disasters, but like, 10 times any other event that we've responded to. And we're looking at, not just what we can do with our own authority in our system, but different partners out there from different government agencies, from the private sector. And then there's been a lot of cooperation also with the state and local partners as well. And at no place ever have I've heard anybody come back to us and say, we can't do that, or we can't do this, or that's not going to work. It's always been trying to find a solution for how we can do it. And, and I'd also just say, like, on a personal note, just how resilient people have been. It's an extremely stressful time for everyone. I've been on a lot of these calls, and I've heard people, you hear them on edge because there's all kinds of things going on in their personal life and with, business. And like I said, it's long days, long hours. But everybody else is very understanding because they know, we're all in this really together. And, for us to come out okay on the other side, it's going to take a full effort from everyone. So I appreciate everything you guys do to help us connect these programs with your members, because really, when it comes to small businesses, SBA has always been there. I don't think anybody understands the things that small businesses go through and the challenges they face more than the SBA, except maybe you guys do, the chamber.
Well, Alex, we appreciate it. We appreciate the work of you and your colleagues. And, you know, this is not a partisan fight. This is an American fight. And our 1.4 million small businesses that are LGBT owned and operated in this country are hurting right now. And, you know, it's never quick enough. But I do have to say what I have seen in the last 2 weeks out of SBA and the turnaround time on loans getting out the door is nothing short of remarkable, more so than in the 10 plus years we've worked with SBA. So I want to say thanks for that. I also want to say, I know we didn't get every question answered. We will get every question answered. It just may come in the form of an email from myself or Jonathan or another member of the team. I again want to thank the administrator. I know she wasn't able to join us, but the fact that you all were so open to getting on this call, sharing your resources, understanding that, you know, our 1.4 million businesses have a combined economic impact of $1.7 trillion on our economy and are looking for answers really means something. And I want to again thank our team at NGLCC for their hard work. I want to thank our affiliate chambers council, regional leadership, and I want to thank each and every business owner and affiliate chamber leader on the call that took time today to learn about this. We'll be putting a resource guide together based on this call that we'll share. And to close it up, I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan. But again, Alex, to you and your colleagues, thanks so much for being in this with us.
Yes, thank you guys.
To Alex and everyone at the SBA, yes, thank you very much from everyone at Team NGLCC. Justin, thank you for helping guide us through this. To everyone on the call, we will be sending out a wrap-out email. And in the meantime, many of the links and resources that you've heard about today are already on our website. Go to nglcc.org, and the first thing you'll see at the top of the page is the link to our COVID-19 resources. For any support you need at this or any other time specific to this call, please email us at sbacall@nglcc.org. Your questions will help us with the Q&A we do after, or with the FAQ afterwards. And for anything the NGLCC can do for you and your business, info@nglcc.org. Thank you, and have a good weekend ahead.